just had
saving? Were we late?
No, your phone changed automatically. That's wrong.
That's wrong.
Oh.
We got an extra hour of sleep. Well, I got up and watched Arsenal at 4:30 and then came back to bed. So they won 3-0. Take that, Brighton and Hove Albion.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a sports podcast now.
For you, one football fan listening.
Hey, a football can be a puppet. Anything can be a puppet.
Kia ora and welcome to Broadway and Other Kiwi Dreams, a podcast exploring the lives and minds of theatre practitioners in and around the Aotearoa performing arts industry. My name is James Shearer, and I've got a bit of a different episode for you today. Instead of diving into someone's life as a performer, we're talking all things puppetry with Rebekah and Edwin from Tusk Puppets. We had a great conversation in which we chatted about types of puppets and the ways performers and audiences interact with them, as well as ways puppets can help with different styles of teaching and learning. And of course, we get into the origins of Tusk Puppets and their current show at the Court Theatre, The Lost Sock. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy a conversation with Tusk Puppets on Broadway and Other Kiwi Dreams.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to be here.
Tell me the origin of Tusk Puppets.
Oh,
This
the
came up-
origin.
The
This
origin
came
story.
up the other day
Yeah.
in rehearsal because somebody was singing that Firebringer song that trended on
I
TikTok.
don't really want to
Do the work today.
Oh, yeah.
I don't really wanna
Can you
I
play that?
am
Is that
Star Kid.
illegal? Yeah.
Star Kid. The YouTube musical people. And there was a production that was due to go ahead in Wellington in 2020 that never did, but we were going to make a mammoth and a snarl, a big kind of saber-toothed tiger thing for them.
So it was like a week into lockdown maybe, and so we had already started building this thing, and we were like, should we keep going? Let's keep going. Everyone's locked in their houses. Let's just keep building a mammoth.
What else are we going to do?
Yeah, exactly. And the police had started their creative community scheme, so they were asking
Creative Genius.
Oh, yeah. Yes, sorry.
Come on.
Not the CNZ
Honestly.
funding. Redacted. No. What's it called?
Creative Genius series.
Creative Genius series. So they sort of put a call out online that they knew that artists, like everyone else, were locked down in their houses, and would they be able to make some content? And so we didn't really want to put, we wanted a name to put to these videos that we were making for them. And Edwin had just made some great tusks for the mammoth that we were building, so that's sort of where the name came from.
Gotcha.
And we were listening to Fleetwood Mac, so
As you do.
yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, there'd been a bit of puppet making going on before that.
Yeah.
It wasn't like we said, let's call ourselves Tusk Puppets and make a Facebook page, and now we're puppet makers. It had sort of been seeded in a bit more gradually, and making sort of little medium-sized hand and rod puppets to send to people around the country.
Yeah.
People who were...
Oh, yeah, because you did, commissions, eh?
A few
Kinda,
commissions. When we first started, we were basically just making puppets and sending them to
Yeah,
people
yeah.
for fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Because you started doing puppetry before that, eh?
yeah. I started puppetry in 2016. Yeah, because it was after New Zealand. Well, New Zealand Playhouse Tour was my first intro into puppets.
Yeah.
And then after that, I started at Woe Studios in Henderson.
And you can hear all about that on your
Yeah,
episode
listen
of the
to my other
podcast.
episode. Listen to the other episode to see how much crossover there is. Yeah, and so then I was sort of like, when Edwin and I started dating, I was like, hey, have you thought about puppets? Puppets. But then he came to puppetry on his own accord.
Yeah, and it's that thing where you have a reason to do it with high intensity. And my reason was Room on the Broom, which is a Tall Stories show that is presented in collaboration with CDP, who are an Aussie company on this side of the world. Room on the Broom's a Julia Donaldson book, illustrated by Axel Scheffler.
Mhm.
And there's puppets. There's a bird and a dog and a frog. And so I was the bird/dragon track.
Classic.
And so I did many months of bird puppetry, and found out how punishing that can be for the body.
Yeah.
But yeah, then also just fell in love with the idea of bringing things to life.
Speaking of like different types of puppets,
Mm.
what do you think is your favorite kind of puppet to puppeteer?
Oh, they're so hard. For me, it's definitely hand and rod, and
Yeah.
I think that sometimes there's an attitude that hand and rod is for young people, but I think hand and rod is for everyone.
Yeah.
But I think puppetry itself has like expanded so much over time that it's there's so much animatronics these days as well, and like that I really appreciate that art form, but I don't think I would be very good at it. I don't play video games.
For me, I think the kind of Joey from Warhorse / the Tiger from Life of Pi, multiple puppeteers who are potentially able to be seen, bringing one object to life.
Yeah, and the puppeteer is almost part of the puppet.
Yeah, you're observing them manipulating this thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that. I love when it's bigger and maybe less fluffy and cute.
Dragon from Shrek.
Yeah. I got to do a little bit of that, stepping into kind of a crew role on a season of that. Well, there was a Christchurch season and a Wellington season that I joined in on. And I was just like, put me in, coach, like give me the hardest position, give me all the weight, and let's sort of do this to the absolute best of our abilities. It was heaps of fun.
Yeah. It was kind of, yes, you're a crew role, but you're like very much performing the role of the dragon.
Yeah.
Yes, well, we can have another episode for the rules of New Zealand and what crew versus cast means, because it's quite different to other countries.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting in the screen industry generally, and I think this probably goes for other countries as well. So much of what you're being paid for and what your rollover, if they renew it, is about your personal image. And so when you're a puppeteer, there is an interesting intersection there between actor / performer and a crew person, because you are hidden and behind the scenes.
I think particularly if you're not voicing the character, right? Because like there are a lot of puppeteers who also work as voice artists, or there's a lot of specificity around puppeteering and voicing the same thing. Whereas in advertising, sometimes someone will puppeteer and then another voice will be dubbed and things like that. So,
I imagine voice actors get rollovers if their stuff just keeps being used year on year, right?
Yeah, if you know, call in.
Taking calls right now. Well, let's get into like stage versus screen, because it's very different. Well, similar process, but different things to think about, I guess.
Yeah, screen, you get to rest your arm more. It depends. Like, I think in theatre, there's more of an effort to being like, oh, is this too long for this character to be up, like physically? But it depends on the type of theatre that you're doing as well. If you're trying to hide the puppeteer, or if the puppeteer is fully visible, I think.
Often, in an ideal world with screen, you can determine your own parameters of. There's some great shots of the Henson Studios Muppets stuff where they are standing up on a fully straight arm, and the set is all sort of at shoulder height or something. It's like they've got this huge these scenery pieces, and everyone's sort of just standing up and it's all lifted up in the studio. So in an ideal world, you can determine those things. You can be like, hey, maybe I'm sitting on a little wheelie dolly and on a perfectly straight arm, and that's actually quite a comfortable position. Maybe you have more control of those kind of conditions in screen in an ideal world where you're not rushed or limited by budget or things like that.
Yeah, I suppose, the one of the main differences between screen and stage is the muscles that you use. Even if the puppetry is the same, if it's hand and rod, the difference between being just at your regular arm height versus above. This is actually easier. Yeah. But that was me holding my arm all the way up in the air. But it's just straining different parts of your body, I guess. And if you look at the puppetry on Sweet Tooth, for example, it's similar to, as an actor, I guess, screen is, you need to be smaller and more specific, whereas theatre is like, hey, can you see this at the back there? Yeah.
Sweet Tooth, for those listening, is a Netflix series starring lots of amazing Kiwi actors, and is well worth a watch. Season 3 is coming out sometime in the next...
Is that public knowledge? I don't know. I think so.
Yeah.
First. I'm pretty sure it's...
I think so.
Okay. Keep listening to the podcast for more information drops.
If it's not, you won't be listening to this bit of the podcast because James will have cut it out.
Do my research.
If it's not, we don't know anyone who signed an NDA and told us that information.
Stage and screen. Yeah. I like liveness as a personal preference. And so when in doing live television, it felt a bit more like doing theatre. So for context for the listener, we have done over the last couple of years a few sort of spots on What Now. Some of that was pre-recorded videotapes, but a lot of getting up early and doing it on a Sunday morning.
For the young ones listening, a videotape is...
similar to a YouTube video. Or a TikTok.
Yeah, I think for me, my preference is screen, but I think that's just because that's where I trained initially, was in screen, and you get to be way more meticulous with what you're doing, I think. But then also live TV is different again, because you can't be like, oh, can we do that again? Like, you definitely saw my arm, or you definitely saw my head. Like live TV, you kind of just have to give in to whatever happens and try not to get gunge on the puppets.
And hope that if there is an arm in shot or something, that it's not bad enough that it completely ruins the magic, you know. If the cameraman stumbles and you get the whole puppeteer with a puppet on the end of their arm, the kids are like, oh no, the magic,
which has never happened. The camera crew at 1 hour amazing.
They are.
Also, there's a funny quirk that people might not know about, which is that the monitor is like the same monitor that a director would look at, so it's what the camera is seeing. So if you turn your hand to one side, what you're seeing on the monitor is the mirror. Flipped, flipped. So it's a fun little bit of brain gym to get used to that, and to not like, you know, when you look at your selfie cam on your phone, it's flipped, and you know, if you point to the right side of the screen, then that's what you see on the thing.
And I think that's the difference with theatre as well, unless you're in an amazingly wealthy theatre where they have monitors. But it wouldn't be very useful in a theatre anyway, because you're moving around so much. But for a director to be able to communicate to you what's happening, if you can see what you're doing, it's a lot easier. Of like, oh, can you go towards that thing, or can you go towards that thing? It's like, I'm actually behind a piece of wood, and I don't know what you're talking about. Because which is really flattering if someone thinks that the puppet is so alive that it can see what's in front of it.
I mean, it happened in Flight Before Christmas, right? Like, Hillary was trying to like get direction.
Yeah.
It was like, go over here, look over that way.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't actually see where you're
pointing at me. I'm looking at your eyes.
It's like supernatural thing for a director, right? That they will like act out what it is they want you to do. Like, oh, can you just do this, and then you can do this, and then you're like, what does this mean?
The puppet can see you.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the back of a set piece right
Yeah.
now.
Speaking of being like seen versus unseen, in like the creation process of a theatre piece with puppets in it, like what goes into the decision whether or not?
I think sometimes it depends on the amount of space. So, like Little A, for example, is a smaller space. So my preference was to be hidden, and I think you also can create like some magic within there if you're having puppets pop down and then pop back up. Then the audience can be like, "Whoa, how did that happen?" Whereas if you're seeing the puppeteer run around, which is also entertaining in its own right. But yeah, then if there's more space, like what we're working with at the Court Theatre at the moment, then having the puppeteer scene is the better option.
Yeah, the journey for this show we're rehearsing currently at the Court Theatre, which is called The Lost Sock, has been an interesting one because at first it was quite conventional in that we had a big sort of flat piece that was a puppet theatre. It was made of drawers. And the puppeteers were hidden behind it the whole time. The idea being you don't see them or any part of them for the full sort of 40-ish minutes. And as we've gone along, we've sort of entertained the idea that there would be a version where that might change. And we're kind of right in the middle of getting to create that right now. And even through the kind of creative discussions that went along in the lead up to this point, we're still working out what that was. At first, we were working with this idea that it might start that way, very concealed, and then bit by bit, it would sort of become more and more that the puppeteers are visible and that we're seeing the process there to the point where they're eventually in a kind of wondrous, magical space at one point in the show, and they are completely free to move kind of wherever they want, however they want, and the puppeteer, the audience are just suspending that disbelief by that point. And we've landed not somewhere in between, but just sort of you establish a convention, and if you do that strongly, then the audience, we hope, go along with you and
come and see to find out.
I think it's interesting, and I think it's just a really interesting thing generally. I mean, we sort of touched on it before with the discussion around Warhorse or Life of Pi, where there is something so engaging about seeing that and about observing within yourself how your brain chooses to sort of sketch that out. Or the intrigue that comes with looking at it and going, oh, I'm actually quite interested in the technical sort of, that person's completely doubled over for long periods of time. Man, that's so impressive. And then it's really interesting to see, just watch other puppet clips on the internet, and sometimes people wear all black and like a kind of stocking or a gauzy thing over their face so that you can't see what they're doing, but you can see a black shape there, but your brain is sort of being encouraged to edit that out. And I saw one recently where it was just an obscured face, so the rest of the body was just in normal clothes, and the hands were very visible in contact with the puppet. But they just didn't want you to see the mouth moving and the facial expression. They wanted you to focus on the puppet's expression.
Yeah, it's all just like stylistic choices, right? But yeah, I enjoy seeing the puppeteer, particularly if the puppeteer is Ralph from Trick of the Light, because his facials are amazing.
Yeah.
It's just like a great way of telling stories, I think. Andy, our director for The Lost Sock, they were talking yesterday about being quite like, it's amazing how many puppets I've come across in my performing career, because it's such a great way of telling stories. And also, if you're trying to keep a cast small, it's a great way of having multiple characters. Yeah. And
sometimes you do think of puppets as like just hand and rod puppets, but they're everywhere, like Lion King, Frozen.
They're everywhere. Watch out.
They're taking over. We will all be puppets.
Yeah. The dream.
Let's get into like the building process.
Oh, yes.
Of building puppets, because that is something that you do. How do you start with, like, obviously you start with an idea of the puppet, but how do you like get into building it?
That is a great question. I think that, the world we currently live in, there's so much access to things online. Like the online puppetry community is huge. So if you're interested in getting into puppet making, Google it. But
I'm not going to tell you. End of conversation.
I was lucky enough to work with the wonderful Paul Lewis, who is an Auckland-based artist. He does a lot of puppet building, so he was very helpful at the start of my puppet making process, because I'm very much like a hands-on learner. I'm not so good at like watching a tutorial and copying it. Like I do enjoy being with someone and showing me how to do that. And then lockdown meant we had a lot of concentrated time to practice that skill.
Yeah. We also had very limited access to materials, so we worked with what we had, and this sort of led us to recycle and upcycle a lot of things. Rebekah being very hands-on means that we don't often start from a sketch, or if it is a sketch, it's a very rough and not a technical sketch of, this might be this big and this might be the internal structure of this. We'll more likely sort of make a rough sculpture. Chicken wire has been very useful in some of not the hand and rod builds. That's sort of, a foam pattern to create a shape, and you get a head, and then you kind of go from there. But in creating a mammoth head, for example, just sort of finding something malleable that holds shape, and sort of squishing it into that shape, and sort of looking at that and putting, this kind of tactile way of putting your hands on it in 3 dimensions and going, oh, okay, like that's going to be a bit big actually. Yeah. Maybe we can squish it down a bit.
Yeah, and what I'm constantly learning within there, when you're doing that chicken wire shape or the tinfoil, we don't use tinfoil really for the bigger stuff.
But it's the same philosophy.
It's a good thing for sculpting. Is that you do the shape of that, and then you have to think about how that's going to get bigger. Because once you add foam and then you add fabric, particularly if you're working with a fur, it adds the size. So you kind of, the base level, you kind of want to be like, oh, that's a little bit small, because then it'll become the size that you want it to. Yeah.
And I suppose the way the puppeteer interacts with the puppet is a big consideration.
Yeah, definitely. When we were building Olaf and Sven for the Court Theatre's Frozen Junior, you're also taking into consideration things like, and is someone, like Edwin's 6'3", I'm 5 foot, so when we're working on a larger puppet, it's like, this is so easy for me. It's like, it's not easy for me. So, trying to find something that is user-friendly for whoever has to use it is something we definitely think about in our builds. Try to think about as much as possible.
It's quite helpful to be quite different proportions. Yeah. And I'm left-handed and Rebekah's right-handed. We can kind of try and...
It's a dream.
And look at the full...
You complete each other.
Puppet building is such an interesting one. I've learned from people who are like, measure twice, cut once kind of attitude versus the like, I don't know how I do it, I just made it. Because it's just different brains work in different ways. I like having a provocation though, because I'm not very good at drawing, or I'm not very good at the like artistic things, but I can make a thing. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah. In the same way that you have to be aware of adding bulk, like Rebekah was saying, you need to make it smaller, but you also need to make it you need to alter its proportions a little bit. You want it to be a little bit skinny and anemic as well as scaled down so that it can bulk up. But also weight is a big consideration there, and just if in doubt, make it really as light as you can. That's why so many things are made of foam and polystyrene, which is, I guess, a different type of foam, and chicken wire and bamboo, and just these things that, you know, weight adds up so quickly, especially when you start putting a fur or something soft and fluffy. Fur is used in puppets. I'm not going to speak authoritatively for all puppet making, but there's an amazing thing with longer pile things or shaggy looking things that once you have somebody's hands on it and that person is a living, breathing person, that life force translates so directly that you could just be trying to hold this puppet perfectly still, and this like very subtle motion keeps it alive. And that's, you know, it's really cool to see the different materials and textiles that people use for that, because that was something I geeked out on Room on the Broom, because the dog had this sort of torn strips of material, cotton kind of coat, so it's not realistic looking, but it's so lifelike. It's just standing there, sort of the slightest turn of the head, all of the body and all of these little tassels are moving around, and you're like, oh, he's so lifelike. And you put him down, he's got no body, he's just sort of a head and a tail and a sack in between. And you put him down, and he's so like looks like a carcass.
You do what?
Well, exactly. He's dead when he's just on the floor, and you pick him up, and he's just like so alive with just an actor taking a breath. You know.
Yeah, this is a bit off topic, but on the same point, like I guess that's why fur animation was such a big leap in animation,
huge,
because it just makes it like much more lifelike.
And on the note of animation, it's puppet making is so interesting. Like how many years into it are we? 4 years, and so there's a thing that happens where it's like, oh, this foam is my favorite foam. I love using this foam. And then you go to the store that you bought it 2 years previous because you stocked up. It's like, oh, we don't make that anymore. You're like, what? No! What am I gonna do? And yes, a few years ago they like ran out of fleece, and then on the Wallace and Gromit they ran out of clay. Just so interesting to me, these like very specific art forms where you rely heavily on a particular material and you use it for so long, and then you go to replenish and you're like, oh, no one makes this anymore.
In our case with foam, it's often, you know, there's no the puppet foam store. You're getting foam from other places, generally more sort of industrial applications, and the things that matter to us don't matter to the tradespeople. So an example is this sort of laminated foam with a kind of backing, and that was a nice light color and sort of wouldn't show through other things that you put over the top of the foam. And we went back to look for the same thickness of the same laminated foam, and they've changed it to black. And we're like, oh, we're trying to make a snowman, so that's a little bit of a challenge. Yeah, we do a sort of workshop that starts from basic object manipulation. We play with screwed up pieces of newsprint. And then we kind of get into
newsprint for those listening.
It's like the paper that you get fish and chips in. Sorry,
fish and chips.
But then we get into, we've got a tub of utensils and odds and ends that we got from the eco shop, and watching new puppeteers bring like a spatula to life and sort of work out how that spatula communicates with the spatula next to it and responds to its neighbor is really gratifying.
Yeah, it's amazing how inanimate objects can teach us to have empathy for humans. Like, why am I so invested in the story of this spoon?
Speaking of the story of a spoon.
Yes. Yes, Forky is my favorite character from Toy Story 4. Thank you for asking.
I did think about Forky. when you said that. No, I want to talk about ways that puppets can also be adult.
Oh,
things.
yes. Many ways.
Yeah.
As I said, anything can be a puppet. So
Yes.
any adult items you have around the house can be a puppet.
Not what I meant.
Oh. I was specifically referencing the flight before Christmas and many props that we had and how
Yes.
we've used those props as puppets. Sorry, can you ask me a question again, James? I've gone too deep into corners I can't escape from.
Well, I suppose on like more mature ways we can use puppetry.
Right, I see. So like Warhorse and Life of Pi, not
Yeah.
not just like straight adults only content.
I think
Gotcha.
there's a very direct association because of Sesame Street, because of the Muppets, also to a degree, of puppets are for kids. If you see like a poster image for a show and it's got puppets on it, you're going to be like, oh, that's a kids show.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's fun to reinforce the idea that that's not always the case. And I think there's a bit of that out there. Like, I mean, when Randy Feltface does shows, do they have an age restriction? I feel like he is quite for the grown-ups.
I feel like he's probably at least R16.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. Can't remember. Saw him in Tasmania. It's lucky enough to
Last
see
year.
him. Yeah, that's a long show to do one hand and rod puppet by yourself.
Continuously,
It's like,
right?
Yeah, you expect him to walk out from behind the thing with like his right arm just like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think entertainment for all age audiences is similar to that hand and rod thing. As you say, think it's for young people, but any kind of puppetry can be for any kind of age group.
Yeah.
That also can be used to your advantage, because then it is so delightful to see a Muppet-style hand and rod puppet being a little bit filthy or grappling with the sort of more adult parts of life or just sort of struggles of a grown-up rather than struggles of Elmo, It's like there's satisfaction in that for an audience, I think.
I think it's also so encouraging of play, like so often as people get older, you forget to play and be playful. And if you're watching a show that has puppetry in it, it sort of forces you into this imaginative mindset. And also the audience is so much a part of the puppetry because you are looking at an inanimate object. So you are creating things in your head. Like there so often people will be like, oh my gosh, it was so great when the puppet's eyebrows did this. It's like this puppet doesn't have eyebrows, but like how great that you were so invested in this character.
Of felt above the eyes.
Yeah, that you created its reaction for you because it's so much from the individual audience members' emotional response to what they're watching. So they're creating half of the character in their head.
Yeah, and I suppose in some ways it could break the stigma of some topics.
Absolutely.
In the way that like you may not be able to say some things as a human to another human.
Yes.
But
in the same way that people put so much trust in a puppet that they might not in a human. Like when we were on Winnie the Pooh tour, for example, we did meet and greets after every show, and like the level of connection that people would have with the puppets is just like so special. You're there as a puppeteer, like, oh, sorry.
I'm not here.
Yeah.
We hear that from some of those commissions we did in the very early days were for people who teach kindergarten or people who are music therapists or who else?
Yeah, we've definitely done a lot of commissions for kindergarten teachers, and sometimes the feedback they give us is that they will utilize the puppet characters to do the things that they don't want to say as a teacher, that the puppet will be like, okay, everybody, it's cleanup time.
Yeah.
So that, it makes it a fun activity.
It's fun to it, yeah.
Or that perhaps they can find a breakthrough with a particular student who's maybe closed off in some way, and that they actually kind of find that engaging with a puppet rather than a human person, kind of unblocks that,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool.
And I guess just for learning in general, can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Like, it just taps into the imagination of the child, and I don't know, connects some learning moments to that.
Yeah.
I love that. I love hand and rod for that kind of filling in with your imagination, sketching in the rest of the image, because like a hand, you're so restricted by a hand, the rod work.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to do, but your brain is so forgiving and so willing to see human motion and human gesture, and so when you see a puppet doing an okay job of clapping its hands together, your brain is just like lighting up with, oh my goodness, this puppet is applauding, and I'm like seeing this full picture that isn't.
I would never try to applaud with a puppet. That's so hard. That's such a hard thing to do.
It's like chopsticks.
yeah. It's possible, but I personally don't think I could achieve it in like a prescribed tempo, I guess. It'd be very sarcastic claps only.
Yeah. But that's a great example, right? If you would be fumbling around with two rods trying to put these hands together, and your brain would go, oh, it's doing a sarcastic slow clap. That's brilliant.
Unless you have my dream job, which is a puppeteer at I think it was the Oscars, and there was a dog at the Oscars, and there's a puppeteer beneath the chair with fake dog arms clapping. That's the dream.
But dream scenarios also is you've got ample puppeteers in any context. Well, not any context, in any screen context, perhaps, and you do have someone who is just second-handing that other rod, in which case applauding, whether it's slow and sarcastic or fast and enthusiastic, would be very possible.
Yeah, I still feel like you would have the second puppeteer doing both.
Yes.
Quite hard to sync.
It's like trying to high five without looking at.
Yeah, exactly.
On like learning with puppets, I guess it could lean into like, I'm no expert on this, but like I know that people with autism have difficulty maintaining eye contact, and having a puppet with eyes might help with that. Have you looked into that at all?
Yeah, certainly people with different abilities, it's like very useful for, as I said earlier, of like your ability to learn different emotions through objects versus through people, because people are very confusing, and we're so frequently constantly lying about how we are doing, or like there are all these social rules that we've created that you have to abide by, but you don't talk about them. Whereas puppets are so frequently innocent and honest and easy to talk to for that reason, because again, as you said earlier, lots of things aren't off limits. It's easier to say things with a puppet than you might as a person, so it's very open. It's very open to connection. And learning, and I think people of all abilities learn emotions through puppets, and I think that connection is amazing, and it really brings out talents in people, and celebrates them for it. Like again, when we were on Winnie the Pooh tour, we had many different people come to the meet and greets who had like every single voice down. Like they would come and speak to every character in each of the characters' voices, and you're just like, oh my gosh, thank you so much, so lovely to meet you. So it's pretty cool, pretty powerful.
Winnie the Pooh meet and greets reminds me of another thing that I'm sure there's masses and masses of work done worldwide with this, but puppets and interacting with dementia. And I think that's a really interesting area that I cannot speak with any authority on, and it's a whole world to dive into, and it could be a really wonderful sort of service to provide. down the track for us to work with, Dimension New Zealand or whoever, and sort of explore that and what works well. And
Terrapin Theatre Company in Tasmania, who are a puppet theatre company, they do puppetry for the elderly thing. They go into rest homes, and it looks really magical and exciting and cool. And I think ultimately puppets provide friendship and connection, and that's all that anyone is looking for, I think. And so that is a great key to learning as well, is like, if you have a friend, if you have a connection, then you're always open to learning something.
And maybe those are great ways to sort of sidestep barriers. If you're thinking of like Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that, there's this sort of block in the way, and to work around that, maybe a puppet is a really useful tool in sidestepping that. So that's definitely something that I see us looking further into down the line.
Let's talk about Lost Sock for a little bit.
Where's a sock?
Where is it? Do you know? Do you know where it is? If you find it, let us know.
It's at the Court Theatre from the 16th to the 27th of April.
There you go.
I'm pretty sure those dates are right. I'm going to just check that.
They are correct.
Okay, nailed it.
Nailed it.
11 and 1. We're doing 2 shows a day. So this show we wrote in collaboration with our dear friend Andy Manning. Going all the way back, there was a kid's book written by a classmate from NASDA, Charlotte Thomas. And this existed back when she was at NASDA. She wrote it for her niece. And Andy read it at the time and was aware of it and was kind of like, this would make a fun little musical show one day, potentially. And then cut forward to 2020. We got a message from them being like, can I call you to talk about a thing? Feeling antsy, sitting still and being like, what could we make? I've had this idea sitting in the back of my mind for a while based on this source material that exists. And we read Charlotte's story. And then we ended up moving down to Christchurch and living with Andy. And it was a very collaborative process from the outset, in that Rebekah's a bit of a songwriter. Andy is
a genius.
Objectively.
And so there was some songwriting from both sides. And
Georgie from Good Times had contacted Tusk to be like, hey, do you have a kids show that we could put in this April slot? And we were like, well, no, but we have an idea of one, and we could make that happen by that April time slot. So that was kind of the kick that we needed.
We're very deadline driven.
Yeah, it's hard to definitely, creativity is hard when you don't have a deadline.
For sure.
Yeah. So that was really wonderful and helpful from her, and then sort of it's lived a life since then as well.
I think it was really helpful to have those parameters. We knew that Good Times is a tiny little comedy club just on St Asaph Street here in Christchurch. Yeah, it's a really small space, and the sort of performance area is kind of a couple of staging decks. It's really small, and so we knew that we had those limitations, but enabling limitations, as it turned out, because it kind of gives you a focus to what you're making. We knew that it would physically be quite confined, and we knew that it was going to be during the daytimes for young audiences, which was the initiative from Georgie to kind of utilize the space in a time when it hadn't previously been utilized, and that we were kind of going after ultimately quite a small number of people to come and see this thing. So it all felt quite manageable. And it's changed a bit since then. We then took it up to New Plymouth with some CNZ funding through the Creative Communities scheme.
Yes, that I mentioned earlier.
And that was a new version of the show. It was largely the same script, definitely the same songs. Andy was then back in Scotland, and so we were working with tracks rather than in the first iteration. They had played guitar live for the whole thing, and with a narrator, and the narrator did a little bit of puppetry as well, and so just sort of this thing is morphing and evolving as it went along, and that was on a bigger stage, sort of 10 meters wide rather than 2.5 meters wide or something, and it was really cool to sort of feel it growing. It was pretty well received. We got again a little bit restricted by COVID flaring up.
We went into the red light, which feels so strange to talk about because that felt like such a short amount of time where the traffic light system was in place. But that only reduced our capacity. It didn't mean that we had to cancel. It just reduced our capacity.
We were fortunate with the venue, which was Fourth Wall in New Plymouth. They, by default, have this kind of cabaret tables seating on a big seating block. So they got plenty of space and it worked out
Everyone
okay.
was spread by default.
Yeah.
So then we did a one-off show more recently in the Off Centre Festival here at the Arts Centre in Christchurch. And again, a different configuration that was exploring having more puppeteers, because previously it had always just been 2 puppeteers plus a little bit of puppetry assistance from the narrator in New Plymouth. So this time we added in 2 additional puppeteers, so 4 puppeteers and a narrator. That worked rather well, but it was very close confines, very cramped behind the puppet theatre. And now we kind of had the opportunity to look at it again. Andy was back in town, so we could have a little writer's retreat and go through and take it apart and put it back together again. And it's been really cool to be able to give a bit of time and attention to it through this rehearsal process that we're in the middle of. Still cramped for time, as you always are. No matter, if we had 5 weeks of rehearsal, we'd still be cramped for time, I think. But it's exciking.
What was the original question? I feel like we've just given you the full history of the show, which is about as long as the show itself.
That's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
It is interesting.
And we...
I mean, I guess the whole thing has been a really big lesson for us in how much effort it takes to put on a show, right? Like it's...
We have stuck with it because even more than we care about the message or that people get to hear the songs or whatever, we care about original stories especially for children. I think it's very common that kids theatre is variations on existing stories.
Sure, yeah.
That can be awesome, and it can be really rewarding to find new messages in old stories. But also I think I prefer new stories being created from the ground up.
I think I personally just value storytelling for young people in particular that is rooted in friendship and connection. So something similar to Winnie the Pooh or things like that, where the storytelling is about a group of friends and the different emotions that we go through together as friends and groups of friends, rather than the princess stories, which don't appeal so much to me personally.
Yeah. Because that's kind of the theme of Lost Sock. It's like friendship. Yeah. Essentially.
Yeah, there are 2 socks who are the bestest of buddies, and
As
one of
socks
them,
should be.
as they should be, they're a pair, they're a partnership, and one of them ends up going to the wash and getting lost, and it's a sort of
Scary.
Yeah,
Terrifying.
it's
It's a
frightening.
horror.
And
That's what the adult show is going to be.
it's
It's not actually
slasher.
just comedic, it's actually just scary.
Yeah, just dystopian.
That's why it's
Oh
R16.
my gosh.
We got some Instagram questions.
Oh yeah.
The first one is from Andrew.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hi, Andrew.
So Andrew said, has your respective puppets accidentally switched voices before?
Ooh, a good question. I think in The Lost Sock, Wiz and Otis have very similar voices for me. So sometimes I think that line gets a bit blurry. Disco Doug has never sounded like Mon, I don't think.
No,
Okay.
but when I have had moments in The Lost Sock with the 2 puppeteer version where we were often doing 2 different puppets on 2 different hands at the same time. I think it was one of the cowboy sort of this voice with and I'm like
The switch.
Yeah, Joe and Mark I think switched voices one time I can remember, and I have a great story about In Room on the Broom. It may have come about through this happening accidentally, but Dog and Frog, there's one puppeteer in particular who plays the role in Australia, and he does the bit deliberately, but frames it like it's an accident.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's puppeteering both at the same time, and then gets the wrong voice stuck in the wrong puppet, and it's like he can't get the voices out of them, and then it all culminates in the frog saying, in the dog saying, "Oh no, I appear to have a frog in my throat," and it gets this big laugh, and then they move
There's
on.
the gag.
Yeah, but it's so funny because it's like they break the whole world. The whole world is so specific, and it's like every moment is really choreographed and precise, and then it all sort of like crumbles down for a moment, and you're meant to believe that this is like a breakdown of the show. But it's all
I mean, it's what you said right at the start about choosing a convention and sticking with it.
Yeah.
But then it can, when you break that convention, it can be a moment as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, good question, Andrew.
Yeah. Erica Brown also sent in a question.
Erica. Hi, Erica.
Hi, Erica.
She said, which famous puppet would you like to puppeteer?
Oh.
Big Bird for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of tall privilege in the world of puppetry.
I was going to say typecast.
Yeah, hugely. Yeah, there was this amazing Henson workshop in America that you had to be at least 5'2", I think. I was like, no.
2 inches.
I mean, that's not that much height privilege. 5'2" is quite short.
Other cool things that there's a company in Sydney called Earth, ERTH, and they do a lot of cool things with dinosaurs that have, like, you wear like a Madonna mic inside the dinosaur. You got a little monitor in there, and and it'll alter your voice while you're operating it to make it sound like roar.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of those are quite restrictive in terms of the size you have to be. So maybe like a T-Rex or something in a world like that. But I think they're also very physically demanding when they're asking for big, tall, strong people. So I don't know how sustainable any of that would be. Yeah.
Piglet was definitely one before I got to play him, so that was like amazing. But yeah, kind of similar answer. Most Earth amazing. Kind of just any puppet that someone will let me puppeteer. Yeah, they do quite a lot of Sesame Street tours, like in lots of different countries. I'd love to have a go on one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into Tomarangi's questions.
Great.
Shout out Tomarangi. Amazing puppeteer.
She is an amazing puppeteer.
And if you want to see her in being a puppeteer, come to Lost Sock.
Yeah, please do.
Please do. How do you translate human body language through puppets?
Oh, a great question from a great puppeteer.
I think the way you interact with gravity can do that a lot. Like if you're carrying a heaviness, that you can physicalize that with a puppet, and then our brains will interpret emotion from that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So gravity's a good one.
Yeah, we always talk about gravity, breath, and focus. And so I think those like main fundamentals translate to very human things. Yeah, breath is like life, right?
Yeah.
So
And we work with, in a workshop, we'll work with big sighs and, excited intake of the breath and that kind of thing. And again, that has a natural physicality that comes with it. If you're just working with breath and you haven't been like letting these workshop participants do anything else, and then you ask them to take an excited breath in, then you'll notice that they immediately have a particular physicality. They'll generally sort of draw up and back.
Yeah.
There's like these instincts that we have which you can rely on generally.
yeah, Edwin did some awesome work recently with Court Theatre Youth Company. Shout out to them. Where there was like quite a human puppet, I suppose, in that it had 4 limbs and was walking around. So yeah, how do you translate human body language? It's also like takes multiple puppeteers.
Sure.
And also you would usually have someone leading that, and that would be the head. So all puppeteers bringing the human puppet to life are sort of taking cues from the head. Sort of how we are alive. We take cues from the brain, and that's how we move around. So.
Yeah. Who's your puppeteer idol?
Tomarangi.
Copy that. Next question.
Jim Henson.
Yeah.
Such a obvious answer, but he did amazing stuff.
Yeah. He's the reason.
He's the guy.
He's the guy.
Jim Henson, Frank Oz, Peter Linz, Paul Lewis, John Coddington, Sebastiano Ricci, Fran Brill, anyone.
Anyone.
Puppeteers are my puppeteer idol.
Yeah, there's some pretty awesome puppeteers out there.
In that list was John Coddington, who, if you are a listener based in Ōtautahi, Christchurch, will be here with Paradise or the Impermanence of Ice Cream, puppeteering a big vulture.
Yes, I always say eagle. I always get it wrong. It's a vulture.
Definitely do not miss that show.
How hard is it to maintain puppeteering for a whole musical?
Very hard. You shouldn't be being asked to maintain it for a whole musical. Oh, well, I guess you are, actually, Tomarangi. Yeah,
This feels very pointy.
Yeah, it has to be a consideration of the director, and ideally the writers as well, to build in breaks, find moments for you to rest, and with an ensemble of characters that can be quite helpful. If it's like, oh, we're having a moment with these new people now, that gives the sort of central characters hopefully a chance to have a break. But yeah, it's challenging, as we were sort of touching on with Randy Feltface. The idea of sustaining that for an entire show is kind of unthinkable when, again, like using the workshop context as a touchstone, something we'll do when we're done with being boring and making everyone, play with spoons and spatulas. We'll put on a song once we've gone through the basics of lip sync, and then we'll lip sync to a song. And they'll find that in the 3 or 4 minutes that the song's playing, that they are getting very tired in their thumb and in their forearm and in their tricep and in their shoulder, just trying to hold the puppet up and sustain the opening and closing of the mouth. So yeah, it can be physically taxing because it is these like minute muscle groups that you don't use all the time. So yeah, weights. Yeah, get
Go to the gym.
tiny little weights for your thumbs.
James Cooper sent in a 2-part question.
Hercule Poirot.
Hercule Poirot.
The man himself.
The man himself. And the last episode of the podcast, if you want to know. hear James Cooper's voice.
I always want
Which
to hear
you
James
should.
Cooper's voice.
Yes. If any film should be Muppetified, what would it be?
Oh, this is a
And
good question.
Why is it Oppenheimer?
There was some images circulating online recently talking about the idea of Les Mis being Muppetified.
There's also a Hamilton Muppetified audio on
Yeah.
YouTube, which is great.
Mm.
I think musicals really lend themselves to being Muppetified. But, so maybe if Oppenheimer was translated, it would also be a musical.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but the first thing that came to my head was Forrest Gump. But I'd watch it.
Yeah.
I thought of the Goonies. I think maybe because I jumped to Treasure Island because that exists in the Muppets world, and then thought of pirates and things. And I thought the Goonies would be a lot of fun. It's an adventure. Yeah.
We're in an age range, I think, where you have really random films embedded in your memory because you lived at a time where you just had 10 DVDs in the house and you watched them on repeat. So in my mind, I'm kind of thinking about Zoolander with Kermit Zoolander, Fozzie Bear as Owen Wilson's character. That's just what's in my head right now. Thanks, James.
Thanks, James. Let's finish on another of Tilmai's questions,
Okay. Oh, yeah.
which is, why do you like puppeteering?
Oh, why do I like it? The wonderful thing about being a puppeteer is that it's not about you. And I really like that.
Sure.
Because I'm very, very bad at receiving any positive feedback. It's not something that that's what happens to me when on What Now, for example, if someone's like, oh, Disco Doug was so funny, I'm like, oh yeah, wasn't he great? And it's very disconnected from me. Yeah. Or sometimes I would be more like, oh, Disco Doug's so annoying. But yeah, some of the most famous puppeteers in the world would walk down the street and not many people would know who they are. Yeah. And so I think that anonymous aspect of it is really nice. Yeah,
I concur. I agree that the separation between puppet and puppeteer is probably the most gratifying thing.
I think my social skills have really decreased since puppeteering, though. I'm not used to looking people in the eye. Yeah.
I, being tall and often hairy, I'm going somewhere with this. Having long hair or facial hair is what I mean by hairy. Often in
I'm with you.
Context of theatre for young audiences, that can be, if you're doing a meet and greet, kids can often be frightened by tall, imposing men. And I think that separation is really interesting, that they, we've done meet and greets after The Lost Sock where I've played Joe in the past. And there's this kind of, when we've been hidden the whole time, there's this apprehension of kids, being like, oh, I want to meet Joe the Sock, but the man is scary. And so I think that's an interesting thing, and it's interesting to be able to, provide that wonderment for kids. Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see with puppeteers more visible in this coming season of The Lost Sock. If I terrify the audiences by being too tall,
or if that allows them to feel more connected to.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank
for
you
being on the pod.
Thanks for having us.
And thanks for coming back, Becca.
Oh, no worries. Just remember, anything can be a puppet.
Goodbye. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed a bit of a different style of episode. That is an episode that I've been wanting to do for a while because I think it's interesting to hear some of the psychology that goes into puppet making and performing with puppets. So I hope you enjoyed it. You can follow Becca and Edwin on all the socials at Tusk Puppets. Broadway and Other Kiwi Dreams was hosted, edited and produced by me, James Shearer. You can follow me on social media at Kiwi Dreams Pod. Feel free to share this episode with someone who you think might enjoy it. Have a great day, and I'll talk at you next time on Broadway and Other Kiwi Dreams.